This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 38.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba. Ramsey watched Face Off 16 times within 1 year.
Happy New Year, SE Nation. Welcome to the first podcast of the new year, and I have a special guest for you. My guest today is Thomas Bieser, and he's the Director of Sales Engineers in North America for Okta, which is a identity management company. We do mention the company in the podcast, but the topics that we talk about are not specific to that, although we use it as a model, but it is transferable and that information could be used anywhere pretty much. And we talked about a whole bunch of stuff, including the discovery process, working with partners, and we talked a little bit about inside SEs versus outside SEs, which isn't a topic we talked about a lot. And before we jump into the show, I do have an announcement to make today. In an effort to create the best SE community I can, or the best SE community out there, I started a book club. So as of today, there are a few books scheduled for the next few months. And we're going to start with Mastering Technical Sales. You can look at the full schedule at wethesalesengineers.com/book club, one word. And at the end of every month, I'm going to send or provide a book review for the book we're reading. And if you want to be part of that, sign up. You can also sign up at wethesalesengineers.com/book club. If you sign up there, you will not receive emails about anything else from me. It's all about the book club. If you're already signed up to my email list and you don't sign up to the book club or the email that I just sent, that I sent out last week, you will not get information about the book club. So I'm not just broadcasting it to everybody. Bottom line, you'll only get the information if you want it. And in the future, because I want to create this community, I'm trying to find a way to actually, after reading the book, to have a way to discuss it, whether it's through a forum or a webinar, whatever it is, and I could use your help figuring out which way you guys wanted to go. So if you have any suggestions, hit me up on Twitter. My handle is at WeTheSEs, or LinkedIn, either Ramsey Majaba or We the Sales Engineers, and let me know what would make the book club a better experience for you. So I'm very excited about this. At a minimum, it's going to force me to read one book a month, so that's a positive thing. I'm also excited about my conversation with Thomas. So without further ado, here it is. Hey Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I really appreciate the time.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming on. I know you may have a hard stop, you may not, so we'll jump right into this. The way I like to start with all my guests is having them introduce themselves to the listeners so that they know who's providing the expertise of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Thomas Bieser. I am a Senior Director of Pre-Sales at a company called Okta. We're a cloud-based identity and access management company that focuses on securing user identities. And I've been at Okta for about 6 years. The teams that I have in my organization, they focus on customers, prospects, partners, all across the U.S. as well as Canada.
So can you maybe provide a brief description of what the difference is between customers, prospects, and partners is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, from our perspective, a prospect would be someone who is not currently a customer of one of the Okta products or solutions today. The customer would be the opposite of that. So that would be someone that is, using one or more of our products as part of an overarching solution. But we may have identified some type of an upsell opportunity sometimes, our SEs are working in the context of a renewal that maybe has or does not have an upsell. Partners, that's kind of a different bag all in itself. So partners for us, that could be either one, value-added resellers, sometimes VARs or value-added resellers in the tech space. They may have folks that, essentially resell from a contractual perspective. They might sometimes have people in a sales or pre-sales context who do have the savvy to actually sell for us, in terms of being able to pitch, to demo, potentially whiteboard what an Okta solution might look like. There are also partners that would be SIs or system integrators, if you will. There are, a number of very large multinational global system integrators. That would be, organizations like, maybe an Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC. These are very, very big companies that have, people that are very tech savvy, that, function as consultants, working on solutions in very large digital transformation type projects. Then you also have smaller regional systems integrators that aren't going to be on that global scale, but sometimes they may have a presence just inside the United States, for example, or they might be more regional. You could find system integration partners, say, in just the Midwest, or just in TOLA, Texas, Oklahoma, et cetera, maybe just in the Pac Northwest, or just in Western Canada, for example. So yeah, those are all the different types of partners we work with, and we actually have a handful of SEs on our Alliances SE team, and what they do is they help enable the partners to understand how to sell, position, demo, whiteboard, et cetera, Okta, as well as deliver some type of proof of value to their prospects and customers, and so that allows us as a company to scale our business. Because they can resell for us, as opposed to us hiring, more and more direct sales reps and SEs.
So it's more feet on the ground as a bottom line.
Yes, that's right.
And so you mentioned the SEs that you have SEs that work with partners only, or you mentioned they work with partners, and so their job is basically to help them be as successful as possible to be able to actually go meet customers, or do they go meet customers with the partners?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So, we've gone through a few iterations as we've grown as a company in terms of how we work with partners. But I would say, in short, the answer is both. In a lot of cases, we may have a partner that is working with a customer or, joint prospect where they say, hey, we think we've identified an opportunity from a discovery perspective, but they might not have the expertise to dive deep enough. So in those cases, we may say, hey, here's one of our alliances or partner SEs. You can actually take them to the meeting physically or maybe virtually and allow them to work with you to kind of, be a helicopter if you need assistance on doing the technical validation, or maybe they can do the technical validation, but they're not yet accredited to do a demonstration, or they might not be ready to do a proof of concept if that's needed. And then in some cases, we've worked with certain partners over the years for so long that, we have enough bidirectional trust that we actually trust them to run the entire sales cycle without our alliances SEs. But the reason they got to that point to begin with in many cases is because, they went through those motions earlier on to learn everything that they could about Okta from our alliances SEs.
Do you notice a difference between the discoveries that your SEs run versus the discoveries that that partners would run?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, in many cases, you're going to have some partners that they do almost an equivalent type of job, because some of the partners that we have in our ecosystem, for example, are actually ex-Okta sales and pre-sales folks who also have ex-Okta post-sales delivery services team members as well. And so in those cases, that they were, very close to, our ecosystem in terms of the enablement that they went through, understanding the jargon, the language, the way that we articulate the messaging, the way we solution, et cetera. Now, there's other partners in our ecosystem who may have a deep identity and access management background, but they, might be learning how to message things, kind of like we do in Okta Speak, if you will. And it's like that with any company that you work at. But yeah, I think that, there's definitely a spectrum where, there are some partners where you can almost slot them in to be very similar to people on our team, especially if they used to work at Okta in the past, but they decided they wanted to, pursue a partner-oriented career. So yeah, the answer is sometimes similar, sometimes less similar, and that's where we have, and we identify enablement opportunities to work with those partners.
I'm just going to share with you my experience with sales channels and resellers and partners, and maybe you can alleviate my concern. What I've found from working with partners is that they have other partners as well. So let's say they sell my product, but they also sell different, like, a company's product. Like, they could be selling Okta at the same time. So their knowledge of all these systems might be diluted, and they might not actually pick up on opportunities from different places just because they have such a broad, product base. Is that something you see working with partners in your territory, or that doesn't happen?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I noted before, there's definitely a very wide spectrum of partners that we work with who are, either VARs or SIs, as I described earlier. And like you said, some of them are, on one far end of the spectrum where they really may have over 100 different products or even thousands of SKUs that they sell nationally and internationally. And I think generally, there's going to be some exceptions within pockets, right? It's just like anything. But generally speaking, with those types of organizations that have, hundreds or thousands of product SKUs that they're selling from different ISVs or independent software vendors, it's going to be really difficult to find people inside those organizations that are going to be able to ascertain the expert level knowledge of Okta that an Okta employee would have, right? But the other end of the spectrum would be, honestly, in many cases, maybe more regional partners where they may say, hey, we're not selling hundreds of things. They might be a partner that's just focused on, cloud-based security products, right? That's obviously not only a niche within all security products, legacy and cloud, but just all software that would be out there to be sold to an enterprise. And then we also do have partners that really only focus on reselling and doing integrations for, 2 or 3 identity as a service companies. So I would say those types of partners are obviously, it's going to be, less time and energy that you're spending because they're very privy to the types of conversations that we have in the field. And like you said, to your point, they're not going to be as distracted by, hundreds of other vendors that are trying to get their attention. So yeah, there's definitely a wide spectrum. And I do think, as you're trying to build a partner program, it's a really interesting thing because a lot of things in the partner world can have, frankly, a lot of murkiness, a lot of ambiguity in terms of, hey, we're spending X amount of time trying to enable partners X, Y, and Z. There's that question of what are the KPIs or, the key performance indicators to really determine if you're winning, if you're making progress. And obviously revenue is, going to be one of those key performance indicators. But, there's also more tactical things like if your company has, a set of certifications, and, fortunately at Okta we have a few industry acknowledged certifications. If you started working with partner X a year ago and they had 0 certifications, and now 12 months later they have 25 people on their bench, so to speak, who are certified with Okta, then obviously you know that you're making progress and you're winning because they're focused on, doing the hard work to, become experts in the technology as much as they have time to do so.
So why would people go towards those generalist partners who have a 100 product if there are those partners that are niched in certain situations?
I think the motivations are really going to vary, but certainly for those organizations that are reselling a lot of different stuff, like you said in that example, I think for one, if they're strategic enough and savvy enough, there are a lot of trends happening within software and within the enterprise world that would lead them, specifically in the case of Okta, to see that one, the world is moving to cloud technologies more and more and more. It's not 5-10 years ago when a company like ServiceNow said, "Hey, we're going to put a service management product in the cloud," and people thought that's just the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. Nobody would ever use a cloud-based solution, right? Same thing with Salesforce over a decade ago. No one would ever put CRM content in the cloud. Like that's just the craziest thing I've ever heard, right? So we're beyond that, and so Okta is, here's me selling a little bit.
All right, go ahead.
But, we created the space that we're in. We're the leader in not just identity as a service, which means a cloud SaaS offering to enterprise companies, but we're the leader in enterprise identity. All the legacy approaches that are out there, and I won't name names of other tech companies because you might have those leaders on the podcast in the future. But I mean, if you look at all the analysts that are out there, whether it's Gartner or Forrester, et cetera, far and away, we execute better than anybody, and we deliver on what we commit to the customer, and we're able to do it in an incredibly timely fashion. So it would be foolish to be a leader inside one of those partner organizations and not see the writing on the wall that within this world of identity specific security products, that Okta is not the leader, right? I mean, if you're a partner, you're going to make the most amount of money where there's the largest amount of market share, right? And that's where Okta is headed towards. And frankly, some people would make the case we're already there in terms of that. But yeah, the world is transitioning from legacy solutions to cloud solutions. So in our particular context, I don't think it's a massive sell to get partners to focus on us. But, for every story I have like that, there are leaders in all these other different spaces, whether it's, ITSM or APM or, CRM, all the acronyms that you can throw out there in terms of what people use in the enterprise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I understood you correctly, the partner is gonna, I guess, steer more towards the products that are gonna sell the most and make them the most amount of money, versus products that might not, might be a harder sell and take them more time.
Yeah, I think that's probably the simplest way to say it. And I mean, granted, you're definitely going to you're going to have, from partners, just like independent software companies, you're going to have a focus on trying to do the best that you can to put together the most useful solution, hopefully, for your customers and your prospective customers. But if you're not making money, you're probably in the wrong game.
Yes, I think that's for every company. Okay, that makes sense. I understand that. But as we were discussing things, you mentioned like discovery, and you also mentioned like putting the best solution for a customer. So, and discovery usually comes up, like the discovery call. It usually comes up as the most important part of sales engineering because that's where we collect most of the information to figure out the solution. How do you recommend to your SEs to walk into a meeting room full of C-levels or engineers with their account manager and run a discovery call?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've got a few high-level thoughts and then some tactical thoughts on this as well. So I do think that discovery is essential within the world of SEs, because that really drives, all the subsequent outcomes in terms of the progress that we make helping our customers. And the more we help our customers, the happier they're going to be, and the more they're going to buy, whatever solution it is that we're trying to sell. And so the cycle continues. A second thought at a higher level I would suggest is that, while a lot of CRMs will, suggest that discovery is maybe just one stage in a sales cycle, I actually think that discovery is an ongoing process as opposed to a one-time event. So, while you may say, hey, we want to come in, with the sales rep, meet together, hear about some of your problems, et cetera, my perception is, yes, you do that meeting, but, you're continually learning more and more about the challenges that you can address. So, discovery is not a one-time event for sure. Now, in terms of best practices, I would, say that we're pretty fortunate at Okta because we've got our two co-founders who both came from a company I mentioned earlier, Salesforce, right? And Salesforce is, arguably the most successful, or one of the most successful enterprise cloud companies that are out there. And being that they came from Salesforce, we have a really high bar in terms of our expectations for our folks in the field, account executives or sales reps, solution engineers or sales engineers, whatever titles you might use, for those folks to do a really diligent job, adding content into the CRM. So in our case, that's Salesforce. So, in the opportunity itself that you have with a customer, we really enforce with the sales reps to provide as much note-taking content and context as they possibly can. And, I would say that the way that SEs and sales reps partner together, it can definitely vary based upon the industry segment that those individuals are focused on to serve, right? You could have, say a sales rep and an SE who are maybe more focused on accounts that are small to medium-sized business. In those cases, the sales cycles might be really transactional and just happening rapid fire, where if you have a really successful product or solution set, the SE might be on the call nonstop, just back to back to back, over a Zoom or a GoToMeeting, et cetera, or, a WebEx, right? And in those cases, it's going to be really hard for the SE and the sales rep to, be able to get in sync and have an hour or two long discussion on account strategy, right? Whereas if you're talking about, larger enterprise accounts, that business tends to be a lot less transactional, right? So you're going to have more time, between calls to, to be able to strategize, have the SE ask as many questions as they can about, what's the current state, what's the infrastructure look like, what are the apps and services? I mean, it's going to vary, right, depending on the product that you're specifically selling. But I just think that, especially when you're working, larger enterprise type accounts, it's essential for the SE and the sales rep to really have a lot of trust with each other. One, for the SE to be able to trust that, the sales rep has qualified the opportunity from a business perspective. There's a lot of organizations out there that leverage an acronym called MEDDIC. Have you heard of MEDDIC before?
No. MEDDIC.
Okay. Yeah. So ME, and it's funny because people can acronym this different ways depending on what they want the letters to stand for. But off the top of my head, M would stand for metrics, right? So a good sales rep or account executive that the SE would team up with, the SE would be trusting that the sales rep is good at, in the case of the M, identifying what are the metrics what's going to be the economic or financial impact of the solution? How does the organization, how does the customer, the prospect, really quantify, if this is the right solution? So there are some metrics, and then the E would be the economic buyer. So that would be the person inside every company. Maybe there's more than one, but there's usually somebody at the end of the day who has the ability to say, hey, we have funds set aside and we have a budget for this project. Like, it's a real project. There's a budget set aside for it, and we're going to spend money on thing X, right? Usually if there's not a budget, you're probably in the wrong conversation. I mean, there can be exceptions where you're selling something to a team that doesn't have a budget, but if the sales rep's identifying that there's a budget, you have a much higher potential for success in the opportunity. And then the rest of the acronym would be another D, or a D for decision criteria. The decision process is a second D. Identifying pain, like what are the business consequences if they don't roll out a solution with us? Oh, we don't know. We don't really know if there's any pain, because maybe it's just a science project, right? And as SEs, we've all been involved in those opportunities where you've got like a really passionate group of either developers or IT folks or security folks, et cetera, that are just kicking the tires, right?
Yep.
There isn't actually any pain. They just want to try some stuff out. And as SEs, our mission is to sell solutions, not to run science projects. And then finally, the C would be the champion. So that would be, who's the key player inside the organization who actually has power and the ability to influence a decision. Because many cases, we are selling to somebody that doesn't actually have the power to make a decision. I've seen sales cycles that are 6 to 12 months where we just haven't identified a champion. And you can have a lot of those prior boxes that I mentioned checked off, but if you don't have somebody that's a champion for you, you're not going to sell anything. So when I talk about the trust, and this is all related to discovery, a good sales rep or exec is going to be mentally thinking about those categories. And if they see that 2 or more of those they can't answer the question to, they probably shouldn't have brought it to a technical discovery call, right? Because that means we could spend a lot of technical time talking about solutions without the ability to actually sell. And I know that it is kind of, a dream state to get all those questions answered up front. Sometimes you just can't. But, those are the types of sales reps I trust, are those that can answer those questions. And then the sales rep in turn should be able to then trust the SE that, hey, I've got a really good qualified opportunity. Now I really need you to, help drive the show from a technical perspective, because that's what we do. So I would say those are some of the tactical things and strategic things that I think about. But I think that, again, it's about really clear communication built upon trust between the rep and the SE. Because if you don't have that, then the discovery calls aren't going to be great, because you're going to have reps that, provide really limited or partial information to the SE. The SE is going to get frustrated because they feel like, they're not really working as a team together, and they're going to feel like they're, throwing darts without a dartboard, essentially. So yeah, I would say note-taking, it's as basic as it sounds, is incredibly useful and helpful, and the open communication. And then as a result, hey, what are the products and solutions that, with the limited information that we have, because we never know everything up front, right?
Yeah.
But with the limited data that we have, what do we think is the best way to position our solution? And then there's all kinds of other variables in there that I haven't even mentioned, like, the timing of the opportunity. What is the project itself? What are the alternatives? If they don't go with our solution, is it maybe something they just build on their own? Or is there a competitor that is maybe better suited for this type of solution? And that's another aspect of trust, where you might have the SE go to the sales rep and say, we are not the best fit. Competitor X is actually a much better fit. and I don't think we should spend a lot of time on this. Maybe we do the initial discovery call to see if we can turn anything else up, but this is probably, not an A-list account for us. It's maybe a C-list account where we shouldn't prioritize.
All right. Well, I've taken a lot of notes. Speaking of note taking, I have a lot of questions. So on the last point,
Awesome.
do your account managers, are they paired one-to-one to your SEs?
That's a really good question. So it really varies based upon our segment that we're talking about. So today at Okta, we have field teams that focus on what we call named accounts. Some companies might call those major accounts or strategic accounts, for example. In those cases, the sales reps are going to have less accounts in their total patch. We have a segment in addition to that called enterprise accounts. So those are certainly very large organizations, but those sales reps tend to have a lot more accounts in their patch. They're going to have dozens and dozens. And then we also have a set of tiers within what we would call commercial accounts. So without getting into all the minutia, I would say at a very high level for enterprise accounts, we're generally close to across all of our teams globally, we're at almost a 2-to-1 ratio. So that means that one SE typically supports 2 sales reps in the field. And then for commercial accounts, that kind of varies by region across the globe, but that's going to be different. So that ratio would be somewhere like 4-to-1 or 5-to-1, meaning you would have 4 sales reps supported by a sales engineer. But for us in the commercial space, what we call commercial is obviously, it might be different than what other companies call commercial.
Right.
But those are by employee count is how we break that out. And our commercial accounts are going to have less employees inside those prospective customers. And most of that business for us, to get a little technical, is going to be done remotely or virtually.
Okay.
So that's why they can actually run at a 4-to-1 or a 5-to-1 ratio.
All right. Well, the reason I was asking is I've noticed that if you have multiple account managers with one SE, and then the SE tells one of the account managers that this deal is not worth working on, they might not enjoy hearing that, and they would still want to work on it. Just because, especially if they're short on quota.
Say that again?
So, if one SE is working with 5 different account managers, and he got an opportunity from one of them, and then he told that account manager, this deal is not worth working on, competitor X has a better solution. From my experience, and hopefully it's different there, the account manager will not take that too kindly, and he would still want to pursue that opportunity anyways. Is that something you see?
Yeah, I've definitely seen that before. But that's where I was referring to the trust relationship between the two. The most successful relationships I've seen between reps and SEs is where the rep really does trust. If this person says, I don't see how we can fit here, those are the strongest relationships. So yeah, to your point, there definitely is a risk at an SE saying that. And so I do think you'd have to be a pretty trusted, seasoned veteran as an SE to feel confident enough to say that. But even then, you still might, like you said, see the rep upset. But yeah, generally I see that probably more at the enterprise level, just because from a ratio perspective, like we were talking about, that SE only has 2 people that they're working with most of the time. And this gets into a whole other interesting topic, which is the notion of alignment, right? So within organizational structures and software companies, some SEs are maybe like you alluded to, they're just a large pool of resources that the sales reps can select and handpick. But then other organizations, you might have alignment where there's an understanding on both sides of the organization, sales and pre-sales, that a given sales rep has a default SE that they're working with. They're a lot less likely in that type of a model to go, hey, I'm just going to go work with this other SE over here, because in that case, they're generally working with the same SE all the time.
I find it easier to build trust if it's one to one or 1 to 2 than it is if you're shared resource between 4 or 5. That's mainly because that's what I've worked with. I've only worked with one account manager at a time. How does an SE build trust with 5 different account managers at the same time?
They have to be really good at what they do. Yeah. I would say, some business and financial models certainly will allow for a 1-to-1 ratio. But if you think about it from a higher level perspective, if I've got 100 sales reps, and that means that I have to pay 100 SE salaries, and you do the math, that's obviously going to be a lot more expensive from the company's quarterly earnings report as it relates to how much they spend on sales and marketing, as opposed to having that, right, or having a different type of ratio. So there is that tension that's very real that you're talking about, for the people that are the executives in the company, to try to figure out how can we make the biggest impact with our direct selling team in the field, but also do it, in as fiscally conservative a way as possible.
You mentioned that when I asked how does one build trust, you said that you have to, as an SE, you have to know what you're doing. What does that exactly mean from an account manager perspective?
Oh yeah, sure. So at a high level, what I think that means is that, one, you have the ability in a pretty uncanny way to be able to, have one foot in the business world, so to speak, and in the other foot on the technology side, for sure. You've got to be able to have those business level conversations with the sales rep, because in a lot of the companies that we work in as SEs, some sales reps are not going to be as technical as maybe others, right? So you need to be able to really bridge the gap in understanding those business requirements and, being a pretty autonomous person in understanding what are the technical requirements that are, going to be able to meet those business requirements. And not just that, but, a second thing would be, how do we actually, position that? How do we articulate that message to the customer? And, when it comes to doing a demonstration, that should kind of influence and impact the type of demonstration that we do, right? It should probably go beyond just doing kind of like a canned out-of-the-box demo to, hey, I understand these are a few of the business requirements that they have. So as a result, I'm going to highlight some things in the product demonstration that are going to appeal to the use cases that we need to be able to show to address those business needs. And then also, being savvy enough to know, okay, what are those use cases that I should maybe show in maybe a little more of a custom demo? And then also thinking, what can our competition do and not do in these cases? And so if there are opportunities where you can differentiate, because you know very well, who the usual suspects are after you've worked at a tech company long enough. You know the other software companies that they're going to bring in, or hardware companies, et cetera. If you know who the other two are, that trust is also coming from the sales rep knowing that you know the competition really well, and you know how to box out the competition and highlight their weaknesses and be able to highlight our strengths in the same conversation, in a demonstration. And that's I think a lot of the art of being a really successful and trusted SE is, when you first start as an SE earlier on in your career, you're just trying to learn, like, how do I do a demo? What do these meetings look like? Who are the people in the organization that I need to talk to and win over? But as you have more and more experience, you learn that there's ways that you can wordsmith things that are going to appeal to the people in the audience, more so than if you just did a demo like you're reading a script, for example.
So, you mentioned earlier that most of your discovery calls happen via virtually through WebEx or Zoom or whatever it is. But you also have other SEs who visit customers, like for the
Yes.
Bigger customers.
Yeah. For our enterprise teams, those tend to be more face-to-face meetings. There are times where we might do something that's virtual or remote, but then our commercial side of the business, that's going to tend to be more remote.
So, did you find a difference in building rapport, getting more information from customers, whether it's through Zoom or in person?
In terms of the challenges, or just thoughts in general?
Yeah, well, like, which one's better in terms of getting more information from the customer, building the rapport with the customer, just so you can actually have a more successful sales cycle?
Oh, yeah. I definitely think that 2/3 of communication is visual. So I think anytime you have the opportunity, whether it's face-to-face or by using, technology like a Zoom or a WebEx or GoToMeeting, where you're actually doing a video conference, I do think that it's really important to be able to see, people's facial expressions and physical gestures. If you've got the opportunity for that, that's definitely, I think, the most optimal thing, because, in many cases, as you ask a question, you can tell who, if anyone, is engaged with the conversation that you're having. And you can also start to intuitively, or in a sensing way, you can pick up by looking at people's facial expressions and physical gestures where there might be an area of sensitivity. And that might not be a technical use case. It might actually be something related to how their organization works, or maybe identifying where does the power reside in the organization. You may sometimes realize with your discovery questions that you've got somebody who can answer the questions, but based on their responses, you might learn that they don't feel like, it's at their pay grade to either answer certain things or distribute certain bits of knowledge. And so that then helps you go, in the debrief with the sales rep, I think we need to, talk to this person in the organization, or that person we just talked to, they know some stuff, but that might not be the person that we need to get these other questions answered by. So yeah, to your point, I think that being able to see people's facial expressions is really beneficial, but not every organization has the business model or the structure to do that.
So if you're doing it via Zoom, most of my customers don't want to actually be on camera. Do you have any tips that would actually convince them to be on camera, or do you just show up on camera yourself and see what happens?
Yeah, I personally have never tried to make the case to get someone to reveal themselves. I think there's various reasons why someone might not return the favor, and that's where I think that for SEs in an organization where they might be doing more remote or virtual selling, there's actually a very unique skill set that enables those types of SEs to be successful, right? Because you could have a really good SE that does fantastic face-to-face, but that same SE, they might actually really struggle to be able to pick up on some of the audio or social cues in just a voice conversation. And that's a whole other podcast topic,
Yeah.
I think, in and of itself. But my recommendation from my limited experience would be, the SEs that do the best in more of a remote virtual type context where, like you said, they don't always have, the gift of being able to see face-to-face or over video, is if they have a really, strong and successful track record in some type of a role in the past, where they were on the phone a lot, and they're able to speak to that success, they're probably a better candidate for that more remote virtual type position than, a more face-to-face type position. And, some people, that they just have a very difficult time learning those audio cues altogether. But in many cases, people that worked in, call centers for retail or banks before they moved into an SE role, or maybe they were a support engineer, right? Because a lot of people work as tech support engineers before they actually become SEs. That's how they kind of get identified within a company. Or maybe they reach out and they go, hey, I'd really like to be an SE. People that are really successful, just as one example, like I said, in a tech support position where you can go to their old manager and say, how did they interact with people over the phone? And what was the experience like with people on the other end? That type of person just has a ton of experience, thousands upon thousands of phone call interactions where, they're able to engage in those types of conversations maybe more successfully than someone that's used to being face-to-face all the time.
Well, there's also the fact that some people might just not want to sit behind a desk for days on end doing demos. I'd rather go visit the customers. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the way we view it at Okta is enterprise selling versus commercial selling is, that there are two different trades. Some people, like you said, they just want to be face-to-face. They want to, walk into the building. They want to be in the room. They want to be able to jump on the whiteboard. And then there's other people that, either maybe because of, family or life circumstances, or just by personality, they may prefer to, to work as an SE remotely.
Would those be considered like inside sales engineers, or are they considered like regular sales engineers who just work from behind a computer?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked, at other companies in the past where remote SEs were part of an inside team. But in our particular case, at the stage of growth we're at Okta, we've basically had our commercial SEs be remote since I've started here, and it's been really successful for us. And they're not part of an inside team.
All right, cool. It's time to transition now to the not so fire round, which are 4 questions I ask every guest, and you can take your time answering or answering them quickly. It's up to you. Is there a gadget that you think a sales engineer should use?
A gadget that an SE should use. I think that, going to our prior point, if you do find yourself having some percentage of your time working remotely or virtually, an incredibly trusted pair of earbuds would be really beneficial. Some people are all about Bluetooth. Some people have had problems with Bluetooth earbuds. So I've seen, some people opt for like the Skull Candy earbuds just because they're wired, or the just like the traditional iPhone earbuds instead of the AirPods. But yeah, just making sure you have really good audio. Probably something that's assumed, but I can't tell you how many calls I've been on where an SE or another person doesn't have good hearing gear. So as basic as it sounds, that's one thing I think about.
Yeah, well, I have not had any good luck with earbuds, so right now I have over-an-ear headphone that's not meant for audio, but hey, it's working.
Good.
Yeah. Is there a book or a resource that you would recommend to every SE?
Yes, absolutely. And I think he's been on your show before. I think Mastering Technical Sales by John Kerr is something that I recommend to everybody.
Yes, it is the SE Bible, from what I'm understanding. All right. I just took a note of that. Do you have any tips or tricks for time management?
Yes. I would say that one of the things that's helped me in my career within pre-sales be really successful and productive is to just, use the calendar as much as you possibly can. If you need to block the calendar out for, your own self-paced training or training in a classroom, administrative activity, places where you have to make, non-customer phone calls, etc., just make sure you block your time out on that calendar, because one thing that you'll find as a really successful SE is everybody wants your attention. And, you can really lead yourself down a path to burnout if you don't do a good job just having good basic calendar skills. And whether you make that, a public appointment or a private appointment, I leave that up to the individual. But I would say definitely block out time, as you need it on your calendar, because otherwise somebody else will try to take your time.
Yeah, like basically somebody else owns your calendar versus you owning your calendar. That's a very good tip.
Precisely. Yep.
What's the best advice you've ever received as a sales engineer or a manager, director? What would that be?
God gave you 2 ears, so use them.
Okay.
Yeah, and that ties back to discovery. I think a lot of good SEs, not all, but a lot of good SEs tend to be really extroverted. And so they have a tendency to talk a lot because they like to talk. And, they might be really passionate about their solution or product. But I think some of the most helpful things that we can do in customer interactions, and discovery is one of those examples of a customer interaction, is to ask really thoughtful questions with intention, and to allow the customer or the prospect to, spend as much time as possible answering that question while you're taking notes. Personally, I use Evernote, but there's a lot of great tools out there. And just take time and type everything that you can possibly capture, because what they're sharing with you, either in the black or, in the white space between the lines, is going to help you to be even more successful. So, try to spend double the time listening, as opposed to the thoughts you have to share, or the questions you want to ask.
Well, that usually is my last question, but I don't want to leave introverts out there feeling left out. What would make a good like an introvert a good SE?
Yeah, I actually know some fantastic SEs on our team, and other companies I've worked with that are maybe more on the introverted side of the spectrum. I think it actually can align with the last thing that I said, right? Introverts are, just by personality or nature, they're going to, tend to not want to talk as much. So that's actually an incredible gift if, they have spent some time thinking through, who the customer is, what their needs are. They're probably going to have an easier time, asking more thoughtful questions, and then, just taking the time to hear back from the customer and what they want to share with them. So I think that's actually a benefit that introverts can have functioning as an SE.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask that question because I didn't want to leave myself out, because I do identify as an introvert. So thank you for giving me confidence.
No, that's a great question, and half of us are. So
Yeah.
totally valid.
All right. Well, that's it. I asked you all the questions that I have. I feel like I have a dozen other questions that I could ask you, but I think it's time we call it a night tonight, and we can pick it up another day if you're still around and want to do this.
Yeah, that sounds great. I really appreciate the time, and I do appreciate the very thoughtful questions.
Oh, thank you. I thought about them.
All right, have a good day.
You too, Thomas. Thank you. Bye. This brings us to the end of my conversation with Thomas. I personally have listened to this interview a couple of times, and I'm enjoying listening to it. Every time I listen to it, I pick up something new. For example, I feel that sales engineers complain about their account managers not doing what the sales engineers think they should be doing. So the best way, through my conversation with Thomas, maybe the best way to get the account manager to listen to you is to have him or her trust you. And the best way to do that is to know your stuff. I'm not saying that you don't know your stuff, but that's the best way to get them to trust you. And because of that, that means the sales engineer can actually be a trusted advisor for both the customer and the account manager. And I never thought about it that way, but through this conversation I did. So that was fun for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. If you did, feel free to leave an honest rating and or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. It helps more people find it, especially if they are in need of a podcast like this. It'll just make it better to see a podcast with reviews or with more reviews versus less. And I am very excited about 2019. I have lots of things planned. So stay tuned, and I'm looking forward to sharing that info with you as soon as I have it, or as soon as I'm able to. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.